here this morning. So I'm Reverend Cindy Grimes, and my series this month is on unity and oneness. And last week, I spoke about the idea of a heart at peace. And I used the example of the Sultan of Egypt and Syria. He was born in 1137 and he lived till 1193, named Saladin, I believe is what his name was, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And I thought it was just a great story of someone who was literally at war. He's a sultan and his community or his country was at war with others. And yet, even in the midst of war, this man had what we call a heart at peace. In other words, he was able to see other people as human beings. I mean, when he took over, he allowed women and children to escape. He made sure there was health care, that people were provided for, and he came from his heart. The other thing about having a heart at peace means that we embrace the truth, right? We acknowledge where we are. We don't embellish it. We don't make it bigger than what it is. We don't make it worse. We don't pretend there's nothing wrong. We acknowledge the facts and the truth of where we are. Ugly though they may be, beautiful as they may be, we just acknowledge the truth. The next thing, to have a heart at peace, we actively engage the perspectives of other people. In other words, we don't think that we're the only ones that have the answer. You know, do you ever feel like we make mistakes, don't we? We like to see things from our perspective and think that we are always right. When you have a heart at peace, you engage other people's perspectives and look to expand your understanding and awareness. To have a heart at peace means that we're restoring integrity in relationships with ourselves and others. Relationship with self is knowing our values, knowing what's important for us, and aligning ourselves with our values. In other words, what we think, what we say, and what we do all line up. How many for you, that's a recipe for a heart of peace? Yes. Okay. And also that the relationship with other people becomes the thing that is important for us. Right? It's not just about rules, but it's about how I engage and how I interact with the other faces of God, the other manifestations of God that are around me. And then finally, the heart at peace is one that is a heart at faith, a heart that trusts, a heart that could be in the midst of turmoil and chaos and the swirling storms of life, but still know and be able to be that peace in the eye of the storm, where things may be moving in this direction or that direction, but you know who you are and to be solid in that. That's a heart at peace. So I had another idea for what I was going to talk about today, and I was reading a book that I brought home from the Peace and Justice Museum in Montgomery, Alabama. If you've been coming here, you know that's what kicked off the month. Donna, Norma, myself, Patricia Wagner, and some folks from the River Phoenix Center for Peace Building took a trip to the Peace and Justice Museum in Montgomery, Alabama. And it was quite an amazing experience. I brought home a bunch of books, and I've read 2 of them already. The one that I read this week kind of took my brain over. So the idea that I had for this morning, what I was going to speak about, went out the window. And this other, I just felt compelled to have to speak about this man's story. And one of the reviewers of this book that I'm going to share with you from today was Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And he said this about the book. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in prison for opposing a racist system in South Africa. Anthony Ray Hinton spent 30 years on death row because a racist system still exists in America. Both emerged from their incarceration with a profound capacity to forgive. They are stunning examples of how the most horrendous cruelty can lead to the most transcendent compassion. The Sun Does Shine is both a cautionary tale for all who think that a great nation can easily forget its past, and is inspiring proof of the inability to condemn a man's capacity for hope, love, and joy. An amazing and heartwarming story that restores our faith in the inherent goodness of humanity. And that's from Archbishop Desmond Tutu. So the name of the book is The Sun Does Shine, And the author is Anthony Ray Hinton. Has anyone heard of this man or this book? I'm just curious to see. Okay. So, as the Archbishop says in the book, this man, Anthony Ray Hinton, was unjustly accused and convicted of a murder that he did not, of 2 murders actually, that he didn't commit, had absolutely nothing to do with it. And he spent 30 years on death row in Alabama, knowing that he did not commit this crime. Even as he was arrested and he was waiting for his trial, which took 1.5 years, he kept thinking, any day now they're going to figure it out, right? The evidence just doesn't line up. He knew he was an innocent man. He knew he didn't do it. And he just had that faith, just knowing that it was all going to work out. And day after day after day, it just became more and more obvious that this wasn't going to change anytime soon. So 1.5 years, he has his trial, and he's actually convicted. Again, just totally blowing this man's mind that this could actually happen in this country. And knowing that the person who actually had committed the crimes was still out there roaming free, still killing people actually, but the power structure in Alabama and where he was at that time just wanted to see someone behind bars. They wanted for the community to feel like they were safe, to feel like they had caught the guy, when in fact they hadn't. So for the first 3 years, this man didn't even speak. The first 3 years that he was on death row, he said he felt like he lost his voice. People would talk to him. The only ones that he would ever speak to was his visitors, which was his mother and a friend of his that visited him every single week. Every week for 30 years. His best friend Lester came and visited with him. And that was the only time he spoke for 3 years. So the book is he's an incredible storyteller, and it takes you on this just roller coaster ride. And I have to say, I think the piece that was most riveting and most heart-wrenching and most horrific to me was when he talked about actually the experience on death row and what it was like the first time he experienced an execution. So his space for that 30 years was a 5x7 cage, essentially, that was just 30 feet from where the yellow mama was kept, what they called the electric chair. And so the first night that they electrocuted something, he didn't know what was going on, but he was talking about the sounds and the hum of the generator and how the lights flickered. And the next thing, and because I have such a acute sense of smell, when he talked about that piece of it. Now, I don't know what I thought about death row, but when I think about this, the picture in my mind is something kind of sanitary, like it's in an enclosed room and you maybe don't hear things, you have to look from the outside. But it's more like, think about bringing a barbecue grill into your house and turning it on. And he said that the smell of the burning flesh and everything that your body excretes at that moment of death, right? Vomit, excrement, all of that together. For 2 days, the smell wouldn't leave the area he was in. He's like, people are throwing up. It's just a horrific image that he showed. And I want to tell you like a direct quote from here. He says, now he wasn't talking, remember, it was another person who was new to death row who said something to one of the guards about this horrific smell. And the guard laughed. He said, you'll get used to it. Next year or one of these days, somebody's going to be smelling you just the same. And what do you think you're going to smell like to everyone? Not so good. Not so good. Hinton says no one can understand what freedom means until they don't have it.
Absolutely.
Right? Nobody knows what that feels like, what it is, until you don't have it. So he's 3 years into serving this sentence, just waiting for his day. And in that 3 years, he is imagining killing the prosecutor, the judge perhaps. He's just wallowing in his anger and his hurt and his pain as anyone else. I mean, I can't imagine really even thinking anything else at this point in his story. And his friend Lester is getting married. And he didn't tell him. He finds out by mistake from his mom. Mom didn't realize that Lester hadn't told him. So he's in his cell kind of thinking about things and commiserating, and he hears this cry, this wailing that's happening in another one of the cells. Now apparently this is something that happens fairly regularly, but for some reason this particular cry was really getting to him. And he had kind of an epiphany. You know, this person is crying, and he says this: I was on death row, not by my own choice, but I had made a choice to spend the last 3 years thinking about killing McGregor, who was the prosecutor, and thinking about killing myself. Despair, I realized, was a choice. Hatred was a choice. Anger was a choice. I still had choices, and that knowledge rocked me. I may not have had as many as Lester had, but I still had choices. I could choose to give up or hang on, because hope was a choice, faith was a choice, and more than anything else, love was a choice, compassion was a choice. And so he's hearing this cry, God help me, God help me, I can't take it anymore. And something broke through to him. And so he called out, are you okay? Are you okay? And it took a little while for the other prisoner to acknowledge, and they had a little conversation. So he's broken his 3-year silence. And he says, I wondered why it is that the cries of another human being, whether it's a baby or a woman in grief or a man in pain, can touch us in ways we don't expect. I wasn't expecting to have my heart break that night. I wasn't expecting to end 3 years of silence. It was a revelation to realize that I wasn't the only man on death row. Right? So for 3 years he's heard this, and tonight he realizes there are other people in pain, just a few feet away from him. I was born with the same gift from God that we are all born with. The impulse to reach out and lessen the suffering of another human being. It was a gift, and we all have a choice whether to use this gift or not. He goes on. I didn't know this man's story, what he had done, or anything about him that made him different from me. Hell, I didn't even know if he was black or white. But on the row, I realized it didn't matter. When you're trying to survive, the superficial things don't matter anymore. When you are hanging at the end of your rope, it really doesn't matter what color the hand is that reaches up to help you. What I knew was that he loved his mother just like I loved my mother. I could understand his pain. See, he was the youngest of 10. He was 29 years old when he was arrested for this crime he didn't commit. And he was the caregiver for his mother. That same mother who would take I think it was 240 miles was the trip one way. So Lester and his mom and Lester's mom would take this trip once a week until his mother became too ill and unable to make it, but Lester kept making that trip. Right? He loved his mother. He wasn't married. He was there to take care of his mother. He loved her. His mother raised him to be a good and decent person. He speaks out to this man again. I'm sorry you lost your mom. But man, you got to look at this in a different way. Now you have someone in heaven who's going to argue your case before God. He said it was silent for a few moments, and then the most amazing thing happened. On a dark night, in what must surely be the most desolate and dehumanizing place on earth, a man laughed. A real laugh. And with that laughter, I realized the state of Alabama could steal my future and my freedom, but they couldn't steal my soul or my humanity. And they most certainly couldn't steal my sense of humor. I missed my family. I missed Lester. But sometimes you have to make family where you find family, or you die in isolation. I wasn't ready to die. I wasn't going to make it that easy on them. I was going to find another way to do my time, whatever time I had left. Everything, 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 I realized, is a choice. After spending your days waiting and spending your days waiting to die is no way to live. So in that moment, as he reached out to this man out of his own pain and felt that common connection with this other human being, and he changed everything for him. He started then reaching out to the others, and they built their own little community. He found out later on that the friends, the person who was crying, the one saying, "God help me, please," who had lost his mother, his name was Henry. His name was Henry. And Henry and Anthony Ray Hinton got to be good friends. In fact, Mr. Hinton started a book club. The warden actually allowed them to begin a book club, and they would bring books into the prison, and they would do their own book club, each man in their own 5x7 cage, yelling across to one another. Right? So they never got to see each other until they had that book club. Then they would have, I think it was an hour a week, where they would actually be physically in the same space, in chairs that were bolted down, where nobody could move. They had to sit in their seats, but at least they could see one another. And there was a point where he found out what Henry's last name was. And when he heard this, see, someone said, the only ones that get out of here are the ones with money. Henry's going to get out because Henry comes from money. Oh, does he? Is that right? Well, yeah, the KKK has plenty of money. And he had to think about that. Well, what was his last name? His last name was Hayes. Everyone in Alabama knew the case, because Henry Hayes had killed a young black man, a 19-year-old black man. It was the last lynching that happened in Alabama in 1981. And Henry Hayes was the first man arrested for the murder of a black man in over 83 years in Alabama. And he was sent to death row. And so in his conversations with Henry and with the other men, Mr. Hinton realized the blessing that he'd had in growing up with this amazing woman who taught him to love. So that when he was faced with the choice every day of hate or love, right, he went back to what he was raised with. He went back to the truth of who he knew himself to be, and he could choose love. He could choose love. And that was what he taught to the men around him. So I want to let him speak in his voice for one of the great lessons that he learned as he was sitting with Oprah Winfrey. I think this was last June or last July that he met with Oprah.
You wrote that we are all slowly dying from our own fear, our minds killing us quicker than the state of Alabama ever could. I knew if the mind could open, the heart would follow. It had happened to Henry. He'd been taught to hate us and fear us so much that he had thought it was in his rights to go and find a teenage boy and beat and stab and lynch him just because of the color of his skin. I had no anger toward Henry. He had been taught to fear blacks. He had been trained to hate. Death row had been good for Henry. Death row had saved his soul. Death row had taught him that his hate was wrong.
Yes. And you know,
he died knowing that.
He died. And what I love, on the night of his execution, they asked you two things. What you want for your last meal, and do you have anything you want to say? And I was told that Henry said, all of my life, my father, my mother, my community taught me to hate. The very people that they taught me to hate are the very people that taught me how to love. And tonight, as I leave this world, I leave this world knowing what love feels like. And I often say that if we can teach people to hate, we should be able to teach them to love.
Yeah. Yes.
In our false society, I thought it take a village to raise a child, and I often asked, where was this village when this young boy was being taught to hate? Where was this village when he needed them the most? And so, I really believe Henry left this world a better man than he came in.
Man, take a deep breath after that one. Yeah. What an amazing story, right? An amazing, amazing story of a heart at peace in the most miserable of circumstances. You know, we talk about hell on earth. I can't imagine anything more hellish than that. He was there for the executions of 55 people during that 30 years that he was on death row. The Yellow Mama. So I wonder, like, what saved this man? And I study this stuff. You know, I've studied this stuff for years. And there are certain commonalities in people who overcome. What we call resilience. Okay. There's a metaphor in the book. He talks about one of the men feeling like they're continually pushing this boulder up the hill, and there's this giant that keeps sending it back down, but they keep going, and they keep going, and they keep going. And that's what this man did. Never. I suppose there were times when he did lose hope, right? But he always picked himself up. He always got back up again. And so here I think of the keys to resilience. Number one is that faith. Number one is faith. Number one is knowing that you are part of something bigger. Believing that there is a greater reason, that there is a greater purpose for your life and your being and for whatever it is that you're going through. That there may be some lesson, some great thing that comes out of it for you. You may not have any idea what it is when you're in the midst of that situation. Sometimes that's all you have to hold on to is, I know that at some point this is going to turn around, it's got to get better. And things always change, always change. He was a man of faith. He was a man of faith. He said the scripture that he really held on to throughout all of that was Mark 11:24. What things soever you desire when you pray, believe that you receive them and you shall have them. Believe and you will have them. That is a central tenet of what we teach in Centers for Spiritual Living, right? The science of mind. When you believe, ask, believing that you'll receive it, and it's yours. He prayed every single day. He prayed for himself. He prayed for the prosecutors. He prayed for the judge. He prayed for the guards. He prayed for all of them. For all of them. That life would get better, that life would be good for each and every one of them, that there would be that awakening in each of their lives. Another key to resilience is the constructive use of your imagination. He spent 3 years imagining putting his hands around the neck of the prosecutor and squeezing the life out of him. Can anyone blame him? 3 years he spent doing that, and he realized that it was keeping him in bitterness and anger and hatred, and that's not who he was. So what did he do? The day the guard told him that, the day the guard said that about, people are going to smell you one of these days, he said, I just checked out. I just went into my imagination. I couldn't be with that image. I couldn't be with that thought. And what he did was he took himself to meet the Queen of England. And he imagined himself meeting the Queen of England. And for years, he imagined himself married to Halle Berry. He said he was married to Halle Berry for 15 years. And then they divorced and he married Sandra Bullock. He used his imagination every day to travel to different places, to have different experiences, to think about the life he was going to have when he got out of that place. He used his imagination to see and to picture the things he wanted to experience rather than continuing to be in the hell where he was in his present circumstance. Does that sound like science of mind to anyone else? When we change the way we look at things, the things we look at change. So he used his imagination for good, in constructive ways, for what he wanted to see manifest. He owned his own power. He owned his own power. Y'all remember my favorite quote from Viktor Frankl: between stimulus and response, there is a space. He had a 30-year space. A 30-year space to keep coming back to, am I coming from love? Am I coming from fear? Am I coming from hurt? Or am I making things better for others? He owned his power to choose his response in every situation. And that is the power that each and every one of us have. That is the greatest power we have. Our greatest freedom is to choose our response to the things that happen to us. And that's what he did. Choosing love. Choosing love. That is the other thing that saved this man from bitterness and hatred, and it's probably what kept him alive, certainly with any kind of sanity, was to choose love. And finally, to have social connections. This is a very real, necessary thing for each and every one of us. That, you know, there are moments when we don't have it all together. There are moments when we are down in the dumps, and we need those people around us to help pull us out. Has anyone else ever been there? I have no doubt that man wouldn't have made it, or maybe even taken his own life, if it wasn't for the friends and family that surrounded him. One of the people that was around him, and I forget to tell you this, was his attorney. It was an attorney that found him about halfway into his sentence. His name is Brian Stevenson. He's the person who created the Equal Justice Initiative and was the moving force behind the Peace and Justice Museum in Montgomery, Alabama, and has helped over 100 people sentences be dismissed, you know, people who were unjustly accused, that were on death row. So these men now are working together to put an end to the death penalty. And this is just my little pitch. My little pitch. One person unjustly accused, one person unfairly, wrongly put to death is one person too many. Yes. This diminishes all of our humanity. To have that kind of premeditated murder happen in the name of the rest of us, of community, is unconscionable. Unconscionable. So keys to resilience. Sorry, that was my little aside. Faith. Using your imagination for what you want to see manifest. Choosing or owning your power to choose. Making the decision to choose love and surrounding yourself by community. Having someone, knowing that there is someone in your corner. And so this kind of leads me into the next piece, and what I'm going to talk about next month, or next time we're together. What is next month? There are members of the Center for Spiritual Living and some other friends of ours, and there's Mark, one of our buddies there, who are coming together to create a peace-building center in Ocala. We're calling it Circle Up. Yes, this is the time is right, the place is right, and Catherine was with us as well this week. This idea, we're still very much in the planning phases and gathering information, but I think Mr. Hinton's story just really reflects the importance of what we're doing and some of the pieces that we can actually physically, that we can do. So peace-building circles, it's really a way of facilitating relationship and restoring and healing of relationships, even within ourselves and with others, through conversation. And these are all things that I could see in Mr. Hinton's story, especially as they talked about doing the book club and what that opened up for people. It's based on shared intention, mutual values, and mutual respect. You know, while they couldn't be in a physical circle, we can be in a circle. And what the circle represents, every person sitting in circle, means that we are all equal. That everyone has a voice, that everyone's voice is important, that we are all teachers and we are all learners at the same time. It creates a space for deep listening and for being heard. Now, this is something you don't have to be in circle to do. You realize that, right? Deep listening. When someone comes to you and they're in pain, or when you're the one that's in pain, what we want to do is create a space, an open enough space for the person to go through that pain and to move through it. Right? We create the space for them to do that in a safe way. You can all do that for the people that are in your lives. You can be that safe place where they can release what it is that they need to release. And that's what happens in circle. Everyone is heard and everyone gets a chance to speak. And we see as people share their stories, you know, when you hear someone's story, you can't hate them anymore. That's what it takes, is really getting to know someone and their story and where they came from and how they ended up the way that they did. And that's why Ray Hampton could have a heart at peace, because he understood that everybody had a story. In fact, he said, I don't even know if Henry was guilty or not. I never looked at him as anything other than another human being, another man on the road. We honor the gifts, the knowledge, the talents, experiences, and the voices of all equally when we come together in circle. Now imagine yourselves, you can be the facilitator of your own circle everywhere you go, even if it's just you and somebody else, right? By acknowledging their humanity, by seeking out their gifts, by honoring their gifts, their talents, their knowledge, and their experience. And we cultivate mutual support and a sense of community through coming together. Again, what happens is people are sharing their stories is, I see myself in you, and you see yourself in me. And somehow, the wholeness is revealed in that. See, because what we say in Centers for Spiritual Living and Science of Mind is really there's nothing to heal. Have you heard that? Ernest Holmes quote? There's nothing to heal, only truth to reveal. The truth is that we are all connected. The truth is that we are all the face of God. The truth is that one spirit that runs in and around and through all things runs in and around and through each one of us. We are all part of that. And when we release our brokenness, when we release the pain, when we release the hurt, that truth comes to the surface. And that's how we create a world that works for everyone. Finally, peace-building circles facilitates everyone's growth and healing. And isn't that why we're here? You know, our first value here, Centers for Spiritual Living, y'all remember it? Spiritual growth and practice. Spiritual growth and practice. Right? This is how we get to be all that we came here to be. So peace building, based on shared intention, mutual values and respect. We create space for deep listening and for being heard, for healing, for honoring the gifts and talents of others, for cultivating mutual support and respect and that feeling of community. And so we're going to start a practice run, aren't we, Mark? This Tuesday. So for anyone who would like to be present for that, for our first circle, we're going to be doing that Tuesday evening at 7. I don't know we're still all in the planning and the learning phases. I don't know if there's an optimal number of people. There's probably a point where, maybe the circle is too big. I don't know, but we're just going to get started.
Will that be here, Cindy? Will that be here?
That will be right here. And
What time again?
it's 7 o'clock.
Is that how long?
7? No, I'm sorry, 6. 6 o'clock, scratch that. 6 o'clock,
Wow.
Tuesday for an hour.
Is there a particular subject for the circle?
I don't know yet. I think what we're going to do in this first circle is really talk about circle. And some of these pieces, as well as some of the other practicalities of coming together in a group and what it is to facilitate that process. So we'll be expanding more on this, in the coming weeks, but I'm excited about it. I'm excited and feel very encouraged at the possibilities, and I'm going to share with you all the different ways that this process can be used and where it might be applicable. And we see already places as diverse as death row, where this kind of idea and process can make a difference for people. So I invite you to join us on Tuesday.